Sagon, Big House here. I just wanted to show you an image of a Mohawk Indian of about 1,000 years ago. Now understand there's 3 feathers up, but you would normally have 3 of those white with the black trim feathers, which is an eagle feather. That's also the top one is a young eagle feather. The middle one is probably an owl feather, but a Mohawk Indian in ceremonial dress would have 3 of these eagle feathers straight up. Now, there's a misnomer about feathers in the culture of Indians. Feathers were not given to you. You were earned. Now, you would earn as a Mohawk Indian brave. You would start your adult trials at about 1 reed, which was about 8 years old. And you would have to pass your adult trials before you were 1 reed, 2 stones, which is about 11 years old. Now, at the passing of adult trials, you were, number 1, given your official Indian name, which you'd carry pretty much for the rest of your life. Mine as a child was Big Belly, or Guanalajieta. My godmother saw that coming, that they were going to name me after my adult trials, Big Belly. She named me after my godfather, the Flying Saint, Guanalaqua, which means just man of big house. And man, am I glad I didn't have to sit here and tell you my name was Big Belly. So, at the passing of your adult trials, you were given your adult name, and you were treated at 11 years old as an adult. You got to go hunting, you got to go to war, you got to do everything that an adult would do. Now, as you're looking at this, you're thinking, that Mohawk haircut, cut down everything shaved off except the center. Now, this is the story that I heard on the reservation as a child. That Mohawk haircut was back when the government had put a bounty on Indian scalps to get rid of the American Indian. They paid per scalp for every scalp you came up and presented. And this was to get rid of the Indians, but your scalp hunters back then, they would go out in the West and just scalp anything that would stand still for the bounty of the scalp. The Mohawk Indians, the story that I get, now, true or not, I tend to believe it. It is kind of funny. The Mohawk Indians, they shaved their heads, everything but the scalp in the center, and then dared you to come and take their scalp, and that's where the haircut came from. Now, you see feathers on people's Indians, and you think, oh, that's to identify them. Well, in a way, but any extra feathers you have, or tokens, which would be that beaded bear claw necklace, that was given to you for achievements, or honors, or bravery, or battles, and you earned battle feathers, and you earned achievement and bravery feathers. So feathers were not just given to you just for fun. You had to earn feathers. Now let's go to a boy of 11 years old, 1,000 years ago, a Mohawk brave. One of the adult trials was hunting a deer. When you find out in the Great North Woods, we didn't ride horses. We hunted from the woods, and our mainstay for clothing, food, and everything else was the white-tailed deer. So to hunt a deer, you first had to get permission, and you got permission from a blue jay. The blue jay was called the bird of the big mouth. Now the blue jay was the protector of the white-tailed deer. If you saw a herd of deer running through the woods out of fear, trying to get away from an enemy or whatever, you would see a quarter of a mile ahead a blue jay screaming at the top of his lungs and leading the deer to safety. It's called the bird of the big mouth. So say that you wanted to get a deer. Now, as a young Indian brave, you would pick the biggest and strongest deer that you could find in the woods. I'm old and crusty and 70 years old, So if I was going to hunt a deer, I would find one with one eye missing, three legs, crippled, and could barely walk. It'd be easier to catch. Because 1,000 years ago, a Mohawk brave was expected to be able to run nonstop 100 miles. The reason for this is you needed to hunt the deer, and the deer could only run 40 miles nonstop. Now, here's the clue. You wanted to get a deer. You had to get permission from a blue jay. So you would go down to the creek, get a fish, cut the fish from the nose to the tail, and lay it on a rock, nose up, for a token gift to the blue jay. If the blue jay did not accept this gift, you could not get a deer. If he accepted the gift and ate any part of that fish, you were allowed to hunt a deer. Now, you would pick the biggest, strongest deer out there, and you would start chasing it. Now, you didn't really have to run. You just had to keep the deer moving for 40 miles. And at 40 miles, you would exhaust that deer of its energy completely. And you could walk up to that deer with just a simple knife. He would look at you and acknowledge that you have defeated him. And you could walk up with a knife and take his life. Now, that was the easy part, because you had to bring every bit of that deer back to the village. And this is 1,000 years ago. There wasn't any such thing as lying, stealing, and cheating, because it wouldn't even be invented for another 600 years. So you had to take that deer, turn it around backwards, and put it over your shoulders. So the back legs would come over your shoulders. You'd bend over and walk that 40 miles back to the village. Now, the Indians 1,000 years ago, they claimed they used every part of that deer except the squeak. And the squeak, it took me a long time to figure that out. That's the noise the deer makes. They use the hide, the meat, the entrails, the bladders were all used for carrying water, of course. The brains were used to tan the deer hide to make it soft. So every part of that deer was used. Let me give you a little hint of what happened if you did not pass your adult trials. Your adult trials, like I said, were completed and had to be passed before you were about 11 years old. If you passed, you were an adult with full adult privileges. If you did not pass, you were a slave to the village. You hung around the village and did the nasty, disgusting work that the females did not want to do. You were never given full adult rights. You weren't allowed to wear the feathers. You weren't allowed to have an official name. You were just son of Strong Eyes or son of Long Bear, whatever. You were never given your own name. So it's very important you passed your adult trials. That's the men. Now the women were even tougher, because the women, you understand, it's a matriarch society at this time. So the women control and own everything. They control all the land and the money and the everything else. And if a woman did not pass her adult trials, she hung around. Her adult trials were learning to plant crops, to tend the children, to bear the children, and the worst part, to control the men. Now, the controlling of the men, really, I don't think they've conquered that skill even to this day. The story that I heard is the man is always the head of the household, but the woman is the neck that turns the head. So if you want to be continually being fed and living, you wanted to take care of the neck. So if a woman or a girl, and by this time it's a woman, failed their adult trials, they had two choices. They could either stay in the compound and be a slave and do all the disgusting things that the slave men did not want to do, or they could leave the compound without any protection or clothing, which back there, going into the wilderness, was just like suicide. There's no way you'd survive out there without protection or clothing. So, again, all the feathers on an Indian were ceremonial, but the extra feathers and tokens were earned.